Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shah. The U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan Reconciliation, Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad, is on his visit to Pakistan. Yesterday, he met the Foreign Secretary Tahmina Janjwa at Foreign Office. He also met Chief of Army Staff General Bajwa. Today, the U.S. envoy met Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi. The war in Afghanistan, United States war in Afghanistan, is the longest war of U.S. anywhere ever. It has entered in its 17th year. Trillions of dollars have been spent in Afghanistan, but there is no end in sight to the war that is going on in Afghanistan. Interestingly, Taliban still control large parts of Afghanistan. Still, Afghanistan is in political turmoil somewhat. There is unprecedented violence in Afghanistan. US has been trying to have direct talks with the Taliban. US did. Now the thing has moved to another level. US wants Taliban to talk to the Kabul government. Taliban have denied all that because Taliban have been denying what they call the legitimacy to the Kabul government. They think that the Kabul government is supported by the foreign troops of foreign power, which they think is primarily the main hurdle in bringing peace in Afghanistan. Recently, several Taliban leaders were released by Pakistan in a gesture that Pakistan can help United States and the countries in the region to bring peace and stability in Afghanistan. Pakistan has stood for peace and stability in the region and especially in Afghanistan. But still, things are unpredictable. We yet have to see if Taliban would agree to hold talks with the Kabul government. Would it happen? What would be the future scenario of peace and stability in Afghanistan? Would Zalmay Khalilzad be successful in bringing Taliban to the negotiating table to make them have a discussion with the Kabul government? What would be the future, political future of Afghanistan? This is all very important. Also keeping in mind that President Donald Trump ordered the withdrawal of 7,000 troops from Afghanistan out of 14,000. Also keeping in mind that he also ordered withdrawal of troops from Syria. So Taliban perhaps are looking at this whole situation in Afghanistan as somewhat that pressure has been building on the United States. Is the pressure building on the United States? These are the important things that we are going to discuss today, and also Pakistan's commitment to peace and stability in Afghanistan and in the region. To discuss this, we have our special guest in the studios. Our first guest is Mr. Hassan Khan. He's a renowned senior journalist and a show host on Khyber TV. He's an expert on Pakistan-Afghanistan relations and also on Pakistan's foreign policy. Sir, welcome to the show. Our second guest is Mr. Taimur Shah. He is a research associate with the Institute for Strategic Studies and Research and Analysis, a think tank in Islamabad. Welcome to the show, Mr. Taimur. Mr. Hassan Khan, starting with Zalmay Khalilzad, American envoy, his visit to Pakistan. He has been visiting Pakistan very often. This time he met again the Foreign Secretary, Chief of Army Staff, and Foreign Minister, Pakistan's Foreign Minister. US at this point is trying hard to bring Taliban to the table. They want to talk to the Taliban. They have been talking to the Taliban. What is US at the moment looking for in Afghanistan, and also especially with the Taliban?
Look, Taimur, I think this is a very, what we call it, a special visit. And you know, Zalmay Khalilzad was scheduled to visit on Tuesday, but his visit, due to his engagement in Afghanistan, in Kabul, it was rescheduled and delayed for 2 days. So definitely they're looking for, because the Jeddah rounds was when the Taliban withdrew from the Jeddah rounds, so a type of panic situation was created, especially in the US camp and in the Afghan camp. The reason for the Jeddah attacks is reported in the press. One is that Taliban were under tremendous pressure. Pakistan was pressurizing them, the US, the Saudis and the UAEs, and they were forced that definitely you have to meet formally or informally with the Afghan government delegations, which is supposed to be in Jeddah during the talks. And Taliban say, we can't do that right at them. But later on, when the Taliban statement came out, it says something else. It says that there was a lot of changes in the agenda. Initially, the agenda was just based on two things. One, because the UAE talks were quite successful, and they ended on a very positive note. So the next meeting was supposed to discuss two things. One, the withdrawal of the American forces, the timeline for the withdrawal of American forces from Afghanistan, And second, Taliban will give assurances that they will not have any type of ties with the terrorist organization, with the global terrorist syndicate, whether that is Al-Qaeda or anyone else. And most probably the discussion was going to how to halt the terrorist activities inside Afghanistan, like close to a ceasefire. But when they say when the agenda was given to us, this was the timeline for withdrawal of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. It was nowhere. Talking to the Afghan government delegations, and you might have read a number of stories which published today, also pointing out toward the Taliban. It was yesterday when I was doing a program on it, a very senior analyst from Afghanistan was very close to Taliban sources, and he said that Taliban believe, and today this report is also reported by the BBC Pashto service, they said that at the last moment we feel that a lot of what we call it interest group are being created in the last round. They say one, Dubai and UAE and Saudis are looking at their own political things like dealing with the Qatar, dealing with Iran, etc. Then Pakistan has its own things like working for the Americans, working for the Saudis, etc. So that nobody was talking about the peace in Afghanistan. That was almost out of the agenda. So I think this now Zalmay might have realized that the situation is not, no doubt, the situation has not gone out of control. Because withdrawing from one of the round doesn't mean that you say no to the talks. So I think at the moment, Zalmay is in Pakistan, so definitely he is trying to back up. To at least initially he was in search of having a sort of contacts in Islamabad with the Taliban delegation. But when I was coming to the show here, I saw a news that the next round of talks most probably will be held in Islamabad. So I don't know how much the Saudis will react to it. Already the Qataris reacted when the talks were taken out from Doha and they were held in UAE. Right. So definitely Qatar feel that. So definitely when you are going to arrange the next round of talk in Islamabad, what will be the reactions of the Saudis and even the Taliban?
Interesting, because this whole situation is so complex that we have to see the internal Afghan dynamics and then the structural Afghan dynamics, because internationally this is an issue. And there are a lot of stakeholders, certainly. They all have to grind their own eggs in this whole issue of Afghanistan. Ambassador Zameer Akram, renowned senior diplomat and an expert on Pakistan-US relations and on Afghanistan, has just joined us. Welcome to the show. Sir, we're discussing Afghanistan. American envoy Zalmay Khalilzad is on his visit to Pakistan. He met Pakistani officials yesterday. Today he met the foreign minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi. The Afghan situation is very complex. There are internal dynamics, a lot of warlordism. Then there is also internal rift within the Kabul government. There are so many stakeholders outside Afghanistan, regional countries, US and China. What do you make out of this present scenario in Afghanistan?
Well, like you said, it's very complicated. And if anybody has a solution, I haven't met him or her. So it's, I think the last or the most important step is for the Afghans to take themselves. And ultimately, any solution that can emerge will have to be a solution that is acceptable to all the Afghan parties, particularly to the government in Kabul with all its complications, and on the other hand to the Taliban themselves. Countries like ours can play a role to help in this process, but we can't take ownership in this because it's their country. So I think that we are doing what we can. We do not have that kind of leverage, I think, that is somehow is by some people is assigned to us. Some people think that we can bring the Taliban and the Kabul government to sit on the table directly. I think realistically we should not claim to have that kind of leverage. So we can be at best facilitators. But other players like the US, which has a military presence in the in Afghanistan, has a bigger role in the sense that it needs to reach out to the Taliban and also convince them that they are ready to meet the Taliban's conditions. The issue of withdrawal of foreign troops, which is very important to the Taliban, I think is being addressed, and I think the Taliban seem to be satisfied on that score. The main issue now, it seems, is about whether or not there ought to be a direct dialogue between the Kabul government and the Taliban, which the Taliban are not agreeing to. There are ways to go around this. I've written about it as well. From my days that I was in the Foreign Office, and in the old, this is the time when the Soviet Union was occupying that country, we had the Geneva process, and we had the same situation where we and the Afghan government of that time were not ready to talk directly because we didn't recognize them. So the way that was found was for the UN to appoint a special representative that engaged in proximity talks or indirect talks, and then he consulted us, then he consulted the Afghan side, and we came up with a solution, an agreement. I think that kind of process, indirect talks or proximity talk process between the two Afghan parties, is an option that can be used. There could be other manifestations of the same kind of approach if they're not willing to talk to each other directly.
Directly. This particularly is the issue, Mr. Shah, that when you talk about Afghanistan, Pakistan is of the view that these talks should be Afghan-owned and Afghan-led, as Mr. Akram was saying. When we say this, Afghan-owned and Afghan-led, certainly we think that both the Kabul government and the Taliban, they have to agree on something, something workable for both, and have peace and stability over there. But Taliban have denied any sort of legitimacy to the Kabul government, and Kabul government certainly doesn't accept Taliban as a force in a way that not a political entity. How do you see this whole situation? Do you think that both would be coming closer to work out something? Because at the moment we see that Taliban are not moving forward for the talks with the Kabul government.
Thank you so much for the talk. First, we have to go back a little bit from the present scenario. Let's call it Afghanistan, the nucleus of geopolitical strange. This whole strategy in Afghanistan would be based on some of the facts we have to realize. That is the changing in the international order, where US becomes more weakened, and they are, after the Trump administration entrance into the realm of politics, they are actually finding ways to lessen their burdens and leave Afghanistan as soon as possible. But there comes another situation. As a superpower, as having footprints on the soil from the last many years, it is bound and responsible that on the very brighter note, it is the United States which can find a valid, viable solution for it, if it's serious enough. But now talking about what is going to happen in Afghanistan and what's the core issue in Afghanistan, we are talking about who is hosting the talks. But the main thing which we have to draw is, what about the interim government? Are there going to be any settlement towards that? Is Taliban, basically the whole scenario is placed and played under a pressure tactic. Every state is pressurizing another country. United States is pressurizing Pakistan. Pakistan, in a way, is also pressurizing Taliban, if they can have an influence to them. And so vice versa with the other regional countries. Now, the Taliban, why they have had reservation in the 11th hour? Because they are in a position to reclaim their strength, to have the strengthful position on the ground. And that is where they can play their bets more comfortably and more easily. So I think in the future, what we see, are Pakistan going to facilitate more into it? Yes, they are trying. As a responsible regional player, Pakistan is playing its role and its viable role at the extent where it can help Afghanistan's situation to be peaceful.
Right, Mr. Hassan, this is very interesting that every country is pressurizing the other country. Pakistan perhaps is pressurizing, as Mr. Taimur Shah said, the Taliban, these pressure tactics, would they work in near future? Because many experts are of the view that President Trump is not going to wait for maybe another 1 year or 2 years. He wants to pull out troops from Afghanistan, perhaps leave Afghanistan to the regional countries, and they can look after what is happening in Afghanistan. How do you see it?
Look, I think this is a wrong way of doing things, like pressurizing, either pressurizing the Taliban, either pressurizing the Afghan government, either pressurizing any of the party. I think we have to understand that this is the longest war. For 4 decades, as Mr. Ambassador has said, that I think it's the longest the conflict in the region. It begins in 1979 and still it's still continue. So I think expecting that, it's very strange for me that the American believe, or even the Afghan believe, that after 2 meetings, 2 rounds of talks in Doha, or 1 round in UAE, they just a narrative a situation was created that if we are very close to the peace agreement, and I think this is very unrealistic. Either we have seen in the past Pakistan put such pressures on Taliban, like we have arrested in 2010 Mullah Brother and others, but they didn't work. Pressure is not going to work anywhere, specifically in such like situations. So the American needs to understand that dealing with the Afghans, we have to understand the Afghan psyche, whether it is the Afghan Taliban, whether it is the Afghan government, or whether it is the Afghan tribes. So they are into the longest the talks. Even in small issues, they will sit together, they will disperse with an announcement that tomorrow we will sit again. So I think this is, now they are in an international, the conflict is an international conflict. A type of myth has been created that Taliban are very much strong in Afghanistan. They have a control over 40 to 70% of the region. That is not a fact, because right at the moment Afghan government is well entrenched. They have their institutions, they are working. Afghan Taliban doesn't have anywhere in entire Afghanistan any area in control where you can call it an airport or a big city or a big town, etc. They are in control of the valleys. They are in control of the maybe of the mountains, the barren mountain. So pressurizing Taliban or pressurizing Afghan government, I think it's not going to work.
We'll take a break and we'll return after this break. We're discussing Afghanistan. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing on the American envoy, Ambassador Khalilzad, his visit to Pakistan and peace and stability in Afghanistan. Ambassador Akram, talking about Afghanistan, it's been 17 years now. What Mr. Hassan Khan was saying, that we should wait for the people of Afghanistan, let it be Taliban or the Kabul government, and let them sit, let them discuss whatever they want to discuss, let them work out for themselves the future of Afghanistan. Do you think that the international community can wait or would wait for the Afghan people to come up with something that they want in Afghanistan, or would they expedite the process, or should they expedite the process?
Well, the people who seem to want to expedite the process is the United States, because I think they once, well, very clearly President Trump has come to a decision a year after his first announcement of his South Asia policy, that the option of using military force, which his generals persuaded him, has not worked. And recently, as you know, he announced a withdrawal from Syria and a partial withdrawal from Afghanistan. Whether that is going to be implemented or not still remains to be seen, but certainly it indicates that he is in a hurry, because that's one of his election promises, to extricate the US from these foreign wars. So I think they seem to be in a hurry. We, Pakistan as well, I think would very much welcome an early solution, because as you say, this is 17 years of the American presence in Afghanistan, but we have been facing this problem ever since 1979 when the Soviets invaded. So it's been a continuous problem for us in many ways. Refugees, arms, extremism, drugs, all this has permeated into our society. And so it's definitely in our interest as well. The earlier question was about the dialogue between the Taliban and the Afghan government. And you can't force, as I was saying, it's not possible to force, because we do not have the kind of leverage. Nobody has that kind of leverage on the Taliban to accept direct talks with Kabul government at the moment. But I think one of the ways would be to have this indirect process, as I mentioned earlier. The other is to actually see if the international community, together with the people in the government in Afghanistan, can put forward some kind of the end result before the Taliban, in the sense, what will the negotiations lead to?
Right.
And if there is enough buy-in by the Taliban in that end product, in that end result, that might convince them. In other words, what I'm saying basically is that the framework of a future settlement needs to be identified, in which there is a clear idea for the Taliban that they will have a share in the power structure of Afghanistan. That's the kind of incentive that can work for them. I think that would incentivize them to engage in this process. Other than that, using pressure, I agree with my colleagues here, is going to be counterproductive with the Taliban, and especially for Pakistan, because look, I mean, the Americans will leave, and they are thousands of miles away. We are right next door to Afghanistan. We have to live with these people. We have to deal with the Taliban in the future, whether they are in government or not in government. So by using pressure tactics is only going to harm our relations with the Taliban without really leading to any substantive outcome. So I would not advise very much on that. One final point that I want to make here, which is something that a lot of people are talking, what can Pakistan do to find a solution and facilitate a solution. We haven't really talked, at least not publicly, as to what will be done or should be done to help Pakistan in this whole situation. As I mentioned, we have millions of refugees, Afghan refugees, in our country. Is there going to be a solution to that? Is there going to be a recognition of Pakistan's interests in Afghanistan? Is there going to be a recognition of the fact that now this whole basis on which sanctions have been imposed on Pakistan, which was that Pakistan is helping the Taliban, supporting the Taliban. Now the US has come around and saying, okay, kindly help us engage with the Taliban. So they've come around to our point of view, that there is only a dialogue, there is an option. So what is the justification for keeping the sanctions on Pakistan? Because if you want us to help you talk to the very people that you are sanctioning us for having relations with, it's these relations that you are now cashing in to bring them to the negotiating table. So it just makes no sense to me to have these sanctions on Pakistan, and this is something that Pakistan should be saying. You should take these sanctions off Pakistan.
And this also leads to a lot of other questions as well. Mr. Shah, that if these sanctions are there on Pakistan, still Pakistan is trying to help out the United States in Afghanistan. Are we helping out US because of the sanctions? Or are we helping out US because we are more concerned about our interests in Afghanistan or in the region? How do you see it?
I'll agree with the later statement of yours. As sir has rightly mentioned, that we should, at this point of time, we should actually work on the exit framework of Afghanistan. Why these countries are in a rush, if we say so? They are in a rush because the ball has been rolled. Americans, presidents' induction into the politics was a rolling first stone. And everyone had this expectation when he was inducted, that something is going to happen in the region, as it was envisaged as well, that maybe some policy have a shift in the coming future. Now, the framework. Now, we can be more of a concern about the international players, then comes the regional players. So the international players, as they have stakes all around the world, they are going to give some of the leverage to the regional states as well. Now, the regional states, for example, the Moscow talks, for example, the Qatar is hosting. So these are different frameworks working right now, formats. Now, are we agreeing? And now when we see the direct talks between, which is facilitated by Pakistan, now this is something of the offshoot of this whole framework process. Are we even recognizing when 2 months back there's a talk about Moscow hosting talk, and then after 2 months you have a talk at UAE, and then you have a so we have to, the whole community need to get down to one thing, that what is the right format to conduct these talks, and then draw down the actual exit strategy. One, you have the American bases, the Taliban have agreed to it, that okay, we can give you little bit of time so that you can only be left with 2 bases, which is still under debate. That's
Right.
one.
Yes.
Then Pakistan releasing. So every state is also making some initiative, but not coming up with the exact strategic plan. So we need to decide the format and convince these players to come to the format. Say Afghan government. I think Afghan government is also really pushing it hard just before elections. I think after the elections, there can be some sort of negotiations between them. So waiting, as sir mentioned, waiting, we don't have any other option till Afghan elections. So, but we need to strategize and chart out the whole plan.
Mr. Hassan, do you agree with this? Because if Afghan government or the US is not having talks with the Taliban, or maybe still having talks with the Taliban and going for the presidential elections, still perhaps we can, God forbid, see violence in Afghanistan. Nobody, I think, wants to see violence in Afghanistan anymore. But what would be the scenario if, let's say, Taliban, they do not agree with United States or the Kabul government in next day 3, 4 months or 6 months or 7 months? What would be the future scenario in Afghanistan then?
I think, Taimur, look, at the moment, all the parties are at their maximalist position. Taliban maximalist position is the total withdrawal of American forces from Afghanistan. The American maximalist position is Taliban surrender and lay down their arms, sit with the Afghan government and sort out the problem, which is Afghan problems. Yeah. Right. So I think definitely, as I said earlier, 2 rounds or 3 rounds of talks are not that much. And then the parties are directly negotiating. As Ambassador Saab has pointed out, in the past, there is no negotiator between what we call it, the mediator between the two.
Right.
Both are sitting across the table and they are talking to each other. So such like of talks are very much difficult to give you the progress immediately, because both the parties are sticking to their positions for the reasons to nurse down the other one, to get maximum out of it, and then it is an Afghan issue. And I think this is, we have tried such type of rush in 1988, and then we saw the result later on. We have tried the Bonn conference, and look at the Bonn conference was also done in a haste. So, and the same was the Geneva conference. The Geneva was done in a haste, so the result we saw. Later on, the Bonn was done in a haste, and we saw the result. So I think sitting timelines, like as Zalmay has said in Afghanistan, that 4 months, by April we will have a very much, I think, this type of an agreement, and people were expecting that when April, on 20th April, when there is election in Afghanistan, Taliban will be part of the election. So I think it is not that easy. We have to be realistic. If we have a 17 years of war, this new era of war, like the war with the Americans. So if we have a 17 years of war, so we can carry on the talks. At the moment, I see the talks are only for the talks. So far, none of the party has inched, I think, left their position, whether the American or whether the Taliban. So at the moment, I think we need to broad-base it. We need to bring even other countries so to give the Taliban an assurance that is, because so far Taliban have no trust for the American. The American doesn't trust Taliban. Afghan government doesn't trust Pakistan. Afghan even doesn't trust the American. So there is a huge trust deficit between all the stakeholders. So what I will suggest that let's bring other players also into the into this fold, so that Taliban will have a confidence. The Chinese are sitting there on their side, the Russians are there, the Iranians are there, the Pakistanis are there, the Indians are there, the Saudis are there. Maybe it is a difficult, it seems to be very much difficult, right. But I think the better is to carry on the talks at least. Keep it away from the harms, what we call it, from any damage, like this thing happened at the Jeddah rounds. Right. So it is not something new in such like talks. We have not to be to get panic. We have to be confident. Like the American statement was very much, I think, is very strange for me. American statement post Jeddah rounds of suspension was that if the Taliban want to fight, we will continue the fight.
And we'll stand with the Afghan government. And
definitely, but we will. Why you are coming to the extreme level that they have opted for fighting and we will go for fighting?
But that is perhaps because US, the regional countries, the Kabul government, they all have been trying the Taliban to come to the negotiating table. Taliban are stubborn. They are sticking to their point. 17 years on, they don't want to talk to the Kabul government. Many experts also think that President Ashraf Ghani, when he said, he went rather out of the wind, saying that we would be giving visas to the Taliban leaders, we would accept them as a political entity, as a legitimate political entity in Afghanistan. That was all denied by the Taliban because they think that they denied the legitimacy to the Kabul government, which is perhaps to them a puppet government in Afghanistan. But if we continue with what Taliban think, then there can be no end to this Afghan war. Taliban, they have to agree up to something with the Kabul government or with the people of Afghanistan. Would that happen?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay. Look, I wouldn't go so. The thing is that we really don't know what is it that the Taliban are objecting to right now. Okay, it's pretty clear when they say yes that we will not talk directly to this government in Kabul because they are puppets of the US. Okay, so that's their stance. They also have said, and I've read this, that there has been some backtracking by the US on some of the understandings that had been reached in the previous meetings that they have had directly with the Americans. So I'm not sure exactly what the reality is. I think it's important that the version of the Taliban also be taken into account in order to come to a realistic assessment of the situation. I would not go so far as to say that the Taliban are being stubborn because they are obviously pursuing their own interest, which is legitimate. And they have to pursue the interest as they see it. Now, the trick in this kind of diplomacy is to find common ground, okay? And that common ground then needs to be built upon. So it's going to be a step-by-step process. And I agree completely that because there is a stalemate at the present time after 1 or 2 rounds of talks, does not mean that the talks are going to collapse. It's a stalemate and a way has to be found around the stalemate. I think the way, as I said earlier, the way to find a way around the stalemate is to really give the Taliban a sense that there is something in it for them if they continue the process of dialogue. and that needs to be identified. You know, what is it that's in their interest, whether they will gain legitimacy, they will gain international recognition. Some of their people who have been arrested will be released. They will be taken off the whatever lists they are on. These are some of the things that can be done, which can build confidence with them and encourage them to be a part of the process. But to simply put the blame that this whole dialogue process has been blocked or derailed because the Taliban are being stubborn is not going to bring them on the back to the negotiations. So there has to be some incentivize. As I said, we have to incentivize the Taliban so that they have a stake in this.
So the question of incentives, this is very important, Mr. Hassan Khan. Perhaps as Ambassador Akram is saying, that at the moment diplomacy continues, all the sides are trying for talks with the Taliban. Taliban are negotiating with the international powers. Do you think that regional countries can give some sort of incentives to the Taliban or perhaps to the Kabul government, and they can work for the peace and stability in Afghanistan if US doesn't?
No, I think the US is a party, and then the international community. We will not say it's only the US. We have to take the US as a party to the conflict, and Taliban believe that they are the major opponent is the US. As for the regional countries are concerned, I think definitely Taliban have a very good relation with the Chinese. They are in contact with the Russians. They are in contact with the Iran, and there were reports that they have established contacts with the Indian also. Pakistan, I think they have to rely too much on Pakistan. Pakistan is very close to Taliban. Historically, we were the first to recognize their government, especially the three countries, the UAE, the Saudis, and the Pakistanis. And I think for the Taliban to deny these three major countries will be too costly for them, and they understand it. They will never go for complete,
against all these countries,
Pakistan or UAE, but we have to play the game honestly, I think, within honesty. So far, initially, we have to build a trust. As Ambassador Sahib has pointed out, trust in give something to them, offer something to them. Why they continue talk? They are on the field. They are fighting. Day before yesterday, there was a blast in Kabul. There was an attack on the Interior Ministry. You see, a lot of damage have been done, inflicted on the Afghan. Even the civilians, mostly the civilians were got killed because the Minister of Interior is just located within the locality where the lot of civilians are living. So I think at the moment, what Taliban need, at least they need to be recognized. Yes, release of their prisoners, it's top on their agenda. Giving them the what we call it the freedom of movement. So far they can't move. So far they can't. Only you haven't recognized as the Qatar office. Qatar office is not yet being recognized by the Afghan government, because you know when that controversy erupted, when they raised their own flag on the Qatar office, President Karzai then objected over it. And so the Qatar office is not a recognized office. So I think you have to give something to them. So far the Afghan government haven't created a space for them that yes, this is your space. You have to. We will offer you, let's say the NICs or the passports, etc. It was just a political statement. President Ghani has given it. So far they haven't done it practically. So the need to get engaged Taliban, you have to, I think, offer them something to eat.
Right. Mr. Shah, briefly, your comments. What can Pakistan do at the moment? While Envoy Khalilzad is in Pakistan, in Islamabad, what can Pakistan do to bring peace and stability in Afghanistan?
Well, Pakistan has been involved actively now, proactively, I would say. The international community is giving Pakistan a very good chance to comprehend this whole situation. What Pakistan can actually do, and which they have been doing from last couple of months, is the process of reaching out to other stakeholders and telling them that Afghan solution needs a solution. So I think involving more stakeholders actively, building a new valid format where they can give guarantees to each other and compromises and find a common denominators which is faced by all the regional countries as well as international.
Right. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Mr. Hassan Khan, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Taimur Shah, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Ambassador Akram, pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for joining us. It's been 17 years now, and so many innocent people have lost their lives in Afghanistan. This violence certainly has to stop. Ultimately, it is the people of Afghanistan who have to decide for their future. Pakistan and regional countries certainly can make that kind of conducive environment to bring peace and stability over there, but ultimately the people of Afghanistan, they have to decide for themselves what do they want in Afghanistan. Pakistan stands with the people of Afghanistan. Pakistan supports any Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process. Thank you for watching today's show. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.
Misuse everything against our people, our revolution, our values. But be sure about it. According to the facts, right now Iran is one of, in some branches of the industry, is one of the 10 best in the world. How can we do it? It means that we can never waiting for the mercy of the face. It means that when Iran right now is nanotechnology, biotechnology, turbine, missiles, and many, many branches of the industries is one of the 10 best in the world. It means, okay, of course not so easy, but it was possible. And so right now we are so proud of it. And it is great test of the United States that how can they can respond to the people and the public opinion in the world. One by one they work out, not only the JCPOA, in some international agreement also. And who knows what will be the next.
How do you see Pakistan's stance on this nuclear deal, and how do you see the future of Pakistan-Iran relations after this? Looking at the regional security and the trade and the potential that is there.
I'm sure that the people or the esteemed government of the Pakistan, as they said, they very clear stance regarding to the JCPOA, that we are stand along with the Iran as our cohesive partner and cohesive friend during the life, past history, and in the hard time life. And so I'm so optimistic about the future because, my brother, Iran and Pakistan, they have no choice but to come together. Because Iran, if we have a great potential, for example, in the gas, in everything, in oil, in know-how, in technology, okay, we need to partners. Who better than Pakistan for us? And so with this great potential that we are ready to give to our brothers here, and this good market in the both sides as a complementary economy of the two countries, and also the Pakistanis, they can use these opportunities in Iran, these facilities that A to Z, they are open to Pakistan. And so the horizon of the future is so clear. And not only in the bilateral trade and business and relation, but also in international views and regional cooperation. We are so close to each other. And in this regard, I can say hello to future for the two countries.
Ambassador Honodos, pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time.
All the best. Thank you so much for inviting me to your program.
Pleasure. That's all from today's show on Pakistan-Iran relations. Today was our exclusive dialogue with Iran's ambassador to Pakistan, His Excellency Ambassador Honodos. That's all from today's show. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.